Welcome, mental fitness friends, to the Mental Fitness Minute podcast with me, Scott Mickish. Do you remember that thing you were so desperate and excited to have, and how quickly that excitement wore off after you got it? Today, we are going to dive into the practice of gratitude and empathy as we continue to explore the mental fitness level of flexibility, followed by our next listener question. You deserve to be happy, but happiness doesn't always come easily, especially when our unconscious brain is on the constant lookout for problems and reasons to be unhappy. The pursuit of happiness requires conscious effort to calm your amygdala to find the joys in life that includes practicing gratitude. Practicing gratitude is a way to consciously elicit good feeling that you no longer unconsciously feel when what you have is no longer new or exciting, and no longer elicits your unconscious emotional response. There are likely sights, sounds, sensations, and even smells that you are not consciously aware of until you make a conscious effort to notice them. Stop for a moment and be consciously aware of them. What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? This is your reality that your brain is unconsciously processing, but you may not be consciously aware. Take this moment to feel consciously grateful for your life, your breath, your abilities, and what you have in this moment. While empathy is most often thought of in terms of relating to another's pain or loss, it's also important to practice empathy to relate to another's pride and joy. The ability to feel happiness in another's happiness is one quick way to increase your own level of happiness, to feel more grateful and socially connected, to reduce your unconscious stress response. When practiced properly, empathy is an important mental fitness practice that supports neurological growth and development as well. Why do we tend to take what we have for granted, like our health, family, friends, life, safety, security, or just feeling fine, and waste so much conscious energy focused on what we don't have? How many things did you absolutely love when you first obtained them to only lose interest shortly after? Why do we value what's rare or difficult to obtain and take for granted what comes easily to us, that might even be rare or difficult for someone else? Due to how our human brains work, it's only after we lose something and experience the unconscious neurochemical stress response of loss when we realize how rare and precious what we had was, and how much joy and happiness what we had actually brought us. Your unconscious brain is constantly absorbing many more bits of sensory information that go unnoticed and forgotten until they trigger your unconscious stress response, zapping your amygdala. Fragments of these unconscious experiences remain in your unconscious mind, which is why certain sounds, smells, sensations, or visual cues may trigger a memory or unconscious emotional response. Your emotions are unconscious neurochemical responses that require no conscious effort. Therefore, when what you have no longer triggers that rush of neurochemicals that comes from anticipation and excitement, we tend to think that what we have is boring or not enough. Imagination and storytelling play a critical role in engaging our prefrontal cortex, that functions best when we aren't otherwise stressed, and may also be more challenging for those with a neurological or developmental difference. Since we can only ever experience life from our own perspective, there remains a lot that we don't know about life from the perspectives and experiences of other people. It's practically impossible to describe our lived experience in every possible detail to someone else. There is so much to our lived experience that others will never truly know. But thanks to our powers of imagination and empathy, we can at least give others a taste of our lived experience by sharing through spoken or written word, or visually through illustration, painting, video, or photography. Empathy involves listening, learning, and sharing lived experiences to give ourselves and others a sort of emotional taste of another's experience. We can use our imagination to consider their perspective, thoughts, and feelings rather than just our own. By consciously listening or imagining how someone else feels, including their joys, pains, struggles, and achievements, you can develop a greater sense of acceptance and understanding. Of course, we cannot actually experience someone else's experiences firsthand, neurologically or physiologically, which is why even when we empathize, we are still limited to our own imagination and mental abilities. which is also why empathy may be harder for some than others, depending on their neurological state and development. It's important to note that while empathy is an important brain function, it can also trigger our unconscious stress response when the feelings and experiences we empathize with are stressful ones. It's like a mental storm when neurons fire back and forth between your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala, resulting in a perpetual state of stress. It's important to differentiate empathy from sympathy. Sympathy often relates to the sense of pity or sorrow we feel when our mind remains in a third-person perspective, and the emotions we feel stem from our own experience. For example, if someone dies of a painful disease, you might sympathize with their loved ones for their loss based on how you feel about death and loss. You may not empathize with the complexity of their emotions, however, unless you can imagine the emotional complexity of experiencing both grief and relief at the same time. Grieving the loss of a loved one while simultaneously feeling relieved that they are no longer suffering and in pain. Similarly, you might feel sympathy for someone who seems to have less than you, whether in health, wealth, relationships, or abilities, for how dreadful you feel it would be to not have what you have. Empathy, on the other hand, considers their feelings, experiences, values, and beliefs that may differ from your own, and how much pride and joy they feel with the health, wealth, relationships, or abilities they do have, regardless of what others have. When we rely on feeling pity for others in order to feel grateful for what we have, we risk contributing to a toxic social hierarchy in which we unconsciously keep others down in order to lift ourselves up. This is why practicing empathy for others' joys, successes, and achievements is just as important as practicing empathy for their pain, loss, and struggles, to maintain a healthful balance. And now it's time for our next listener question. One listener asks, how can I empathize with someone who hurt me or with whom I don't agree? This is a great question and why the practice of empathy is a challenge and really is a matter of emotional regulation. It's really important to remember that empathy and sympathy are not the same thing. If you want to think of it this way, sympathy is really an unconscious emotion. It's that sorrow or regret or pain that you feel when you see someone else is in pain. That is our automatic emotional response to something that is triggering or we see as traumatizing. Empathy, on the other hand, is really a conscious process that requires some critical thinking and emotional regulation. So you can empathize with your opposing team. You can be a good sport and really cheer for their win and how happy they feel, even though you feel disappointment and you feel the pain of loss yourself. You can still empathize with the winning team as a good sport and take some joy in the joy that they're feeling. That is a great way to deal with loss and failure and our learning process as we just deal with the ups and downs of life. Empathy is also a path toward problem solving. So think of it in terms of that person that hurt you or with whom you don't agree, that carries very different beliefs, thoughts, feelings, behaviors that you find maybe reprehensible or just disgusting, whatever sort of emotional judgment you might place on them. When you can step back from that emotion and think, what is influencing that person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? Is it lack of information? Is it maybe a different life experience? Is it maybe a lack of sleep? Some other sort of cognitive condition, maybe even neurological condition that is influencing how they are perceiving, processing, and dealing with their emotions that allows you to really then understand what is a healthful approach to navigate that situation. Maybe it's avoiding that person. Maybe it's giving them space. And maybe it's just really wishing them well and guiding them towards some source of help or hope that they might need. Or maybe it's a moment that reveals a bias that you have that maybe is contributing to the problem. So when we're only limiting our ability to understand and see things from a different perspective, when we only limit that to the people who we quote unquote like, or who we identify with and who stimulate good feelings and emotions in us, that's actually a sign of our unconscious bias. This is why empathy is absolutely a practice, and you really need to have grace with yourself. That this challenge is really about managing stress and engaging your prefrontal cortex to really consider things from a different perspective, to understand things from a new angle. So it really allows you to just step away from that judgment, that place of emotional reaction, to assess the situation with a little bit clearer mind, a little bit clearer focus, to really understand what's going on, to find those healthful steps you can take to reach the most healthful outcome possible. Thank you for joining me today. Look for me on social media. I am typically on Instagram and LinkedIn. You can also visit 4dfit.net. That's .net, N-E-T. Or again, on most social media platforms, you can look for me, Scott Mickish, or 4D Mental Fitness. And my book called My Brain Can't Poop, A Mental Fitness Guide for Humans, that is available on Amazon in print and ebook format. It's also available on most podcast platforms. And I look forward to talking to you next time.